Well, thank you very much. Can you raise your hands in the back of the audience if you can hear me? Because I'd rather not use a microphone, but of course, since you are my users, your request is my command. So if I'm not talking sufficiently loud, I will use a microphone. This is a very famous Danish painting. By the way, I'm a Dane. I have a Danish passport. I live and work in Denmark. This is a very famous Danish painting. It's called Hip Hip Hooray, Artist Celebration in Skagen, which is the northernmost city in Denmark, by P.S. Krøyer. And I adapted the title slightly because these days it's the 25th anniversary of the heuristic inspection method. And I thought it might be a good idea to look back at the method, see if it has fulfilled its promises, and where perhaps we could have done better. That's about me. I think I said most of it. I've done a number of studies that I will come back to, comparative usability evaluation studies. I have worked with Jacob Nielsen and invented the heuristic evaluation method together with him. And then I have a little bit of shameless self-promotion that I would like to start with. May I just borrow this one here? You have a handout, and I'm sponsored actually by Bonnifoot. Bonnifoot pays for my travel and lodging and so on. And in return, I am very pleased to say a few nice things about UX certification, which is one side of this handout. So we have a number of certifications available. The foundation level certification, do you speak usability essentially, which is probably nothing for you, but it might be interesting for those of your colleagues that you would like them to understand what you are saying. Then we have more advanced more advanced certifications, user requirements engineering, how to do interviews, how to gather requirements, and the one that I'm very much involved in, usability testing and evaluation, which is essentially the topic of my talk today. Bonnifoot in London and Uservision in Edinburgh offer training, but training is not mandatory under our scheme. You're very welcome to study it yourself. Everything, curricula and sample test questions, are freely available on our website, uxqb.org. And that's, if you can't remember this very usable abbreviation, UXQB, then you can look it up here on the sheet. At this time, we're proud to say that almost 1,500 people have been certified, most of them in Germany, but England is catching up quite well, with about 200 certified people at this time. So this piece of paper has a front side, but it also has a back side. And on the back side, we have given you some examples of what it takes to become certified. So you can try out your skills, and if you're really good, then you have a chance of winning fabulous prizes. £50. We have actually 3 prizes of £50 for people who give the best and first answers to the questions here in the back. And perhaps, and that's of course the main reason why you want to do it, perhaps you could learn a little bit about usability evaluation at the same time and assess your own skills. Here's where you should send the answers. That's one of my many email addresses. So I will get them and evaluate them. And like I said, the 3 best and first answers in each category win a prize. We have another, for people who really are after a challenge, we have another competition, this time with £100 in prizes, but this time it takes a little bit longer, because then you have to answer 40 questions from a sample certification exam for usability testing. So if you feel that my talks gets too boring, you can beat the rest of the crowd by handing in your answers even during this talk. It will not count against you. All right, before I start the really key part of my talk, I'd like to share one credo with you. Over the years, and I've been in this field for very long, I've developed a number of basic thoughts, basic ideas that underlie all of my work. And one of them is data is important. Opinions are unimportant. We must get away in our business from discussing things based on opinions. We must insist on having data. And that leads me very natural to the first, to introducing where I've got the data from that I will present for the ideas, the thoughts that I will present for you in the next 30 minutes. These are the participants in a usability competition called CUE8, Comparative Usability Evaluation 8. And the basic recipe for one of these studies, maybe I should just say that that's me. Haha. This is Steve Crook. You might have heard of him. This is Nigel Bevan. This is Thomas Sharon, and so on. Tom Tullis is over here. Some quite renowned people who participate in these studies. The basic idea behind a CUE study is that someone, that's usually me, gets people to sign up for the study. That's not that difficult because it's really a very fascinating way of enhancing, improving your knowledge. So the organizer selects a website that's commonly available. It could be a Hotmail, it could be avis.com. Invite a number of professional usability testers, 15 for example, and each of them will then conduct a usability evaluation using their preferred method of the website. They will do so independently and simultaneously. In most cases, at this time, the participants did not know who the others were. After they had done this evaluation, they wrote an evaluation report that described their findings. The report was anonymous. We were not out to have it so people could laugh or make fun at individuals. That was not the idea behind it. Then the anonymous evaluation reports were made available to all participants. The participants read all the other evaluation reports, and marveled at the differences. I originally came up with this idea because I wanted to find out, I was curious, I wanted to find out, is a usability test reproducible? 15 years ago, the common thought was, yeah, it probably is. We don't know for sure, but it probably is. It turned out it is not. And then we discussed the reports in a full-day workshop and learned from that, analyzed why the teams arrived at different results. And that's the essence of what I'm going to present to you tonight. There are many more results from the CUE studies. We've had 9 until now, and the results take a full-day seminar to present. The number, anytime you take a product, for instance, a modern website, you will find that the number of usability problems is high. It is impossible to find all problems. So Jacob Nielsen's famous saying that with 5 users, you can find 85% of the problems just is not true. It's still a very good idea to test with 5 users. But don't ever assume that you will find 85% of the problems. The evaluator effect is considerable. When 2 people independently evaluate a website, the results are going to be very different, because the evaluator has an enormous effect. We know that the test participants and the test tasks influence it strongly. Usability tests and expert reviews provide results of similar value. That was also a surprise because the common thought until the CUE studies was that expert reviews were not quite as good at finding problems than usability tests were. Right. I believe very much in audience involvement in my talks. So I'm going to present in just a moment a number of statements. And you can all participate in the vote using your smartphone. In the old days, that's about 2 years ago, we used paper cards. But it seemed that that caused practical problems. And it seems that today everyone has a smartphone. So please, SSID, MOO guests, love to print, go to the website shakeq.com and enter the code KU835. And then you should see a screen that says something about wait for the first question to come up. All right. So let's take the first one here. Which one of the following statements is correct? And only one of these statements is correct. Please read them carefully and then submit your vote. Okay, anyone who wants more time to vote? Good. All right, let's see the result. Okay, right. So let me take them one by one, because if you haven't got the right answer, you'll be excused, because I haven't told you anything about heuristic evaluation yet. In an inspection, evaluators and authors of the interactive system discuss the usability of the interactive system. That's not the idea behind an inspection. An inspection is that the inspectors inspect the website without the authors being present. And then they present afterwards the result, and then there may be some discussion. In an inspection, representative users inspect the interactive system based on typical tasks while they are observed. That sounds to me more like a description of a usability test, and that's certainly not correct. Inspections solely consider usability problems. Does anybody know why that is wrong? It's wrong. But why is it wrong? Because inspections also consider positive things on the website, things that work well. A heuristic evaluation is based solely on heuristics. That's correct. We'll get back to that, because that's the core of the heuristic evaluation method. Right, so there will be a vote again in just a moment. But right now, a few definitions. An inspection is a usability evaluation based on the judgment of one or more evaluators who examine or use an interactive system to identify potential usability problems and deviations from established criteria. No users involved, not necessarily any tasks involved. Very different from a usability test. And a heuristic evaluation is a subform of the inspection. Heuristic evaluation is an inspection in which one or more evaluators, preferably experts, compare an interactive system to a list of heuristics and identify where the interactive system does not follow those heuristics. So the characteristics here are, it's based on heuristics, there are no test participants and no test tasks. Non-experts, for example users, can carry out a valid heuristic evaluation, even though that's not done very often. I'll get back to that because there's some interesting history behind the last remark here. All right. Here we have a heuristic inspector who's getting ready for work. I took that, it's kind of a joke, of course, but it illustrates something very important. If you do heuristic evaluation the right way, you are limited, your field of view is strictly limited by the heuristics. Anything that you observe that cannot be attributed to a heuristic, you should not report. I know, most people do it anyway. But that's not the core idea behind the heuristic evaluation method. Because the moment you start reporting anything that's not covered by the heuristics, you might be mistaken. So the basic idea behind the heuristic evaluation method is that you point out things that are based on a set of recognized heuristics, because then you're on safe grounds. By the way, in a usability test, you're similarly limited by what? Does anyone know? There's similar limitations. Your field of view in a usability test is also limited. By what? Participants. By the participants and by one more thing? Task. Yes, very good. By the usability test tasks. Next question. Usability findings from inspections are as reliable as findings from usability tests. All right. This statement is actually correct. Our studies, there have been some articles who say the opposite. We examined these articles and found that their data material was rather weak. We've seen again and again in our CUE studies that the teams who did inspections found results that were as reliable as those teams that used usability testing. So it's actually correct. Here's a graph that at least pretends to show this. From CUE 4, where we examined Hotmail, we had the key findings. The findings that the 15 teams agreed on were most important. And there were 26 in total. There were 26 of these key tasks in total. And the top 4 teams, the teams who found most of these problems, all used usability testing. But the 2 teams who found fewest of these problems were also usability tests. And some of the teams that used inspection actually did quite well. And there was no support for the statement that an inspection or heuristic evaluation finds only minor details. But of course, in this case, it depends very, very much on the evaluators who actually do the test or do the evaluation. Nielsen's heuristics are definitive, the statement says. Usability findings are valid only if they match one or more of Nielsen's heuristics. Thank you very much. I'm very relieved by that answer. I would actually go as far as saying that this statement is simply rubbish. It is not true. There are many valid usability problems that have nothing whatsoever to do with Nielsen's heuristics. They're fully valid anyway. Usability laypersons can conduct valid heuristic inspections. In other words, you don't have to be a UX expert to do heuristic evaluation. What do you think of that one? Good. I'm positively surprised by that one. But that is very true. That was the original idea behind the heuristic evaluation method, that we would develop a method that would enable anyone conduct a heuristic evaluation. The idea being, of course, that perhaps we could get developers to do these heuristic evaluations. So some of these basic problems that occur again and again in websites and interactive products just would not happen anymore. Good. We've covered some of the experiences, some of the things we've learned over the years about heuristic inspection, about heuristic evaluation at this time. Let me share with you the original vision that I had when we made up the method 25 years ago. My vision was that I wanted to develop a simple and cheap method that prevents frequently occurring usability problems and that can be applied by anyone, including usability laypersons. And I did that because I saw again and again in my usability tests that we found violations of the same basic problems: badly phrased error messages, lack of feedback, not speaking the user's language, insufficient basic information on the screens, and so on. And so the idea that Jacob and I had was that we would write a number of heuristics that would prevent these problems from occurring once and for all. I will tell you later on in my talk that that unfortunately remains a dream. We have not succeeded with that one. One of my colleagues, Yuri Kirakowski, analyzed the use of the word heuristic in heuristic evaluation. And I very much agree with him when he said, the use of the word heuristic as a label is an example of scientification or blinding with science. Heuristic evaluation simply sounds better because it's less comprehensible to a layperson. Anyone can understand what an expert is, but a heuristic, wow. The approach, how does one do a heuristic evaluation? If you really want to follow the method, if you really want to do it correctly. Well, let's try out with a simple question. How many evaluators are needed for a heuristic evaluation? Please. Very interesting. Yes, one, that's what the CUE study says. What does anyone know what the original paper says? Jacob's original paper, and I actually had to look back into that when one of my students told me, Rolf, you're not being in accordance with the great guru's words. But Jacob's original article actually says 2 people. Why is it better to have 2 people than have 1?
They'll come up with different things.
Yes, but if you have 2 people, there's one activity that's absolutely essential. That's to have a frank discussion between these 2 people. If you don't have that, then you might as well just have 1 evaluator. Let me just get back to that because it comes here. Here I have described a primitive approach to heuristic evaluation. The authors present their product to the evaluators evaluate the product together and describe their findings. The evaluators present all their findings to the authors. My question to you, and this is not a multiple choice question, which important steps are missing in this approach to heuristic evaluation? Because there are some very essential elements that are missing here. Does anyone know?
The evaluators carry out the exercise on their own first?
Yes, that's right. So they must not do it together. We want them to go back into their cubicle or their office and do it in solitude. And then what should happen afterwards? After they have evaluated in solitude?
They present each one presents their findings to the other.
Yes, I feared you would say to the team, but that's, they present them to each other and
then they widen the discussion.
And have a frank discussion about the differences that are where everyone is ready to accept, yeah, perhaps I missed that one, and yeah, I overlooked that one, and so on. Yes. And the final step here, what's wrong with that?
They don't present everything, just the key findings, I guess.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true, but there's something that's even more essential.
It's not only the authors, it's stakeholders.
No.
The team.
Present the findings they agree on?
Yes, exactly. That's the important part of the consensus building. That one is okay. No, start by evaluating separately, then build consensus. No, only present the findings where consensus could be reached. It's very essential, so I actually have it here on a separate slide. A frank discussion between the evaluators is decisive for the validity of the results of a heuristic evaluation. But again, our studies have shown that even with just one evaluator, if that evaluator happens to be an expert, they can often do pretty well with half of the resources, of course. That, by the way, applies for usability testing too. If you have a moderator and a note-taker, it is essential that the moderator and the note-taker discuss their findings immediately after each session. It doesn't have to be for very long, 10 minutes. But it's very important to have this consensus building. And not just the one who writes the report gets all his findings or her findings in the report. This is a slight aside, but I thought it's so important that I want to mention it here. We have learned over the years that heuristic evaluation and any other inspection method can be political dynamite in an organization that's not mature usability-wise. And the symptoms that will show that you are approaching a confrontation or an opinion war is a remark like this one. Why are your opinions better than mine? So you've done an inspection or a heuristic evaluation, and the stakeholders don't like your findings. Then you're going to hear remarks like this one. Why, these are your opinions. My opinions are different. Why are your opinions better than mine? If that happens, what should you do? Get data, yes, and how? In the back. Yes, run a usability test. Because that's the only way that I know of to improve the usability maturity of an organization that asks questions like this, which are entirely reasonable. So the final thing that I would like to discuss are the heuristics. After all, it's called a heuristic evaluation. So we need to address the heuristics briefly. A heuristic is a generally recognized rule of thumb that helps to achieve usability. And here Nielsen's heuristics. A recent study found that this is by far the most used set of heuristics today. There are other sets around. They have not stood the test of time. I'm not totally unbiased when I say that, I know that, but still. These are Nielsen's 10 heuristics from 1994, and they are very nicely explained. I did not have part in that, in his work on that, on Nielsen Norman Group's website. So go back and study that. But a very important heuristic is missing in Nielsen's list. What is it? Well, it can be hard to see, but there's one that's missing, and this has been a often heard criticism of Nielsen's heuristics. I'll show you. It's this one, suitability for the task. Nielsen's heuristics do not describe, is the product useful for the users? That is not included among the heuristics. I don't know why. The heuristics sound easy to understand at first glance. But my experience shows, when I try to teach them to my students, that they're not that simple to understand after all. So I've taken here a rule of thumb that's called speak the user's language. And so I ask you to vote about which one of the following heuristics, and these are 4 of Nielsen's 10 heuristics, matches the rule of thumb, speak the user's language. So hopefully you can convince me that they're not so difficult to understand after all by voting for the right Nielsen heuristic. Good. Thank you very much. 72% voted for the right one. I hope you will agree with me, and I speak from some experience since I'm teaching university students these heuristics. It is not simple to see that match between system and the real world implies use words that users understand. Maybe it's natural to you. It's not natural to me. And then another one of my colleagues, Cliff Anderson, raised the very interesting question of the actual purpose of these heuristics. He said, heuristics may serve as useful reminders, but if you need to be reminded to look for simple stuff like consistency or feedback, the heuristics aren't really going to help you. You need a lot more help. You have much more serious problems. So on one side, the heuristics are helpful. On the other hand, if you need to use the heuristics, you have essentially dequalified yourself. Sorry. Here are some other heuristics. Nielsen's are not the only ones around. Schneiderman has a set. But I took this one. That's a very recent production from Jacob Nielsen. Look at this one. 2,397 usability guidelines. Wow. That's totally non-usable. How would you ever find the right guideline amongst 2,397 guidelines? That's one of the reasons why originally, 25 years back, we limited ourselves to 10 guidelines. Right, so let me summarize where I stand now, 25 years later, hopefully 25 years wiser. What have we learned? Well, we have learned on the positive side, Nielsen's heuristics are by far the most used. It is unclear how much heuristic evaluation, which is different from the use of the heuristics, is used in practice today. The heuristics can be used independent of the heuristic evaluation, of course. The results from some of our CUE studies indicate that some claim that they're doing heuristic evaluation, but in reality, they're using expert reviews because they're tearing off their blinders. They're so desperate to report other problems that they think might be problems, but which are not supported by the heuristics. And that's fine. But then, if you do that, please don't call it a heuristic evaluation. So that's my summary, which I'm going to build up gradually. The heuristics look simple, but in practice, it's complicated to apply them correctly. We have not been good enough, and that includes me. We have not been good enough at providing examples that clearly show how these heuristics should be interpreted. Orthodox heuristic evaluations, they're the ones with the blinders, are rarely done in practice. In most cases, people essentially do a review on expert review, based on experience and opinions and gut feelings and, of course, heuristics. It's just not a pure heuristic evaluation. Results from reviews and heuristic evaluations are comparable to results from usability tests. 20 years ago, the literature said that reviews mostly find minor problems. It's not correct. Yes, expert reviews and heuristic evaluations overlook problems. But we have seen clearly from the comparative usability evaluations that so do usability tests. Usability tests are not perfect. Heuristic evaluations can be political dynamite in organizations that are immature with respect to usability. And finally, the vision that heuristics will be used by designers and developers to prevent usability problems has remained a dream. The dream was developers, designers would know all of these 10 heuristics by heart, so we would never ever again see a bad error message, which is covered by one of Nielsen's 10 heuristics. Yeah, that's what I had to say here in my first talk. Any questions?
Why do you think it's remained a dream? Where's the system broken down?
Who was asking?
Yeah.
Oh, you.
Final point, the vision that heuristics can be a tool to help prevent some of these problems. What happened? What happened?
Because, I don't know. Maybe we haven't been good, and maybe people like me have not been good enough in preaching these heuristics. Maybe we haven't been good enough to explain the words, what the words in the heuristics mean. I really mean that the heuristics are hard to use. You need explanations, you need examples to transfer them to understand what they mean in the real world. They look very nice and say, yeah, of course, and yes, I do that all the time, and so on. Of course, it has gotten better, but I still see a lot of missing feedback, a lot of words that are not the user's language, and especially a lot of badly phrased error messages. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think that heuristic evaluation is best applied in a specific stage of a product, like when it's released or during its production, or even, I don't know, closer to the concept?
I don't know. And I would resort to my initial credo and say, I don't have any data for that. So I'd rather not have an opinion about that. I would say it's useful in almost any situation. So I can't point out in particular a place where it would be a phase in a project development where it would be particularly useful, or where you should be particularly careful to use it. Good. Yes, one more question, and then we'll have a break.
Mentoring someone else in my own company tomorrow, I will be taking them through this. Do you have any advice for me? Do you have any advice for me for tomorrow?
Maybe I would wait unless you have good examples from your company's own products to illustrate either positive, how this heuristic has been exemplary fulfilled in one of your products, or a glaring violation of that heuristic. I would make very sure that if I had to do it like that, I would make sure that I had good examples to make sure that the message really gets through. Okay. So if you have that, fine. If you don't have that, maybe postpone it a few days and think about what kind of examples you would present to them. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have, I think there are a few websites who do that, and every time I I look at them, I see some good examples and some not so good examples for these heuristics.
Are there any final questions?
What's your preference or advice when doing heuristic evaluation? If you take one heuristic and then check all interface elements with this one heuristic, or you go for one page, for example, and then go through all heuristics?
That's a very good question. Actually, I must confess, and I'm very glad you asked this question, because I have a confession to make. I don't do heuristic evaluations very much. That's why I'm grateful that you asked this question, because I forgot to say that. And I think that's, well, I think that's a very important addition. What I do today, and I think that's a constructive part of it, I do persona-based evaluations, which is a variant of cognitive walkthrough. So essentially, you take a persona by the hand, and you walk with that persona through a scenario which often represents a series of key tasks. And for each step, you look at the heuristics, and you look at a number of questions, in fact 4 questions, that our gifted colleagues who invented the cognitive walkthrough method have given us. Is it clear to the user where he is, what he must do, and what the effects will be of what he is doing, what he is supposed to do if he does it right? I think that's an excellent method to do an expert review. It's no longer a heuristic inspection, but it's still, the heuristics are still useful, exactly as you say, as a checklist along the way.
Thank you.
Okay, we will start again at 8:10. Can you welcome us?